This new Netflix limited documentary series, Trial 4, it should really piss you off. In 1993, a teenager named Sean Ellis was arrested on suspicion of killing a Boston police detective, John Mulligan. After 3 trials, Sean Ellis was finally convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. This limited documentary series follows Sean as he prepares for his 4th trial. Now, Sean is granted a 4th trial because of the relentless, dogged pursuit of his new attorney, who just keeps fighting and fighting to get things uncovered, to get things admitted, and the court system is just so frustrating. Now, in this documentary, we get tons of access. I mean, the cameras follow Sean, they follow his attorneys, reporters, his family, even the DA, so that they can really get the stories, the interviews, and build a really good picture of everything that happened and is currently going on. There's also a ton of news footage. I mean, this made headlines massively because it was a cop killing in Boston. Even on the night of the murder itself, there was a camera crew in one of the police cars that was called to the scene of the crime. Now, I don't know if that was like a cops type of thing where they were just happened to be filming and there it was, but that is crazy footage just right from the very get-go. There are a ton of interviews that we do get in this documentary, but there's also a massive list of people who declined to be interviewed or to be any part of this new documentary. And at the end of each episode, they give us a list of all of the people that were contacted by the documentarians in order to have their side of the story told or to provide insight or whatever, and for whatever reason, they declined. There's some reenactments done in this, and it's tied to interviews and even court testimony or just other testimony. And in this, it's different than a lot of the other times we get those cheesy, just dramatic reenactments. In this, it's an artistic animated type of thing where it's hand-drawn and it's beautiful to look at, but it's not just, a character playing out all of these things. I mean, more often than not, it's some static shots of just beautifully drawn illustrations. This is a very heartbreaking story. I mean, right from the very get-go, the motive and the facts that are uncovered, they just don't make a lot of sense. I mean, and this is all coming from the Boston PD. And so just the way that they are presenting things, the reason that they are saying that the events went down the way they did, and why Sean Ellis was even there and why he committed this crime, you look at it and you go, well, that doesn't make any sense. And then the actions following that don't make any sense either. So the documentary does, at a portion of this, it really dives in to the Boston Police Department itself during that time, and even up to current day. And we're talking racism, corruption, coercion, cover-ups. Some of the interviews that they get are just downright disgusting, because we have some interviews with former or retired Boston police detectives. And let me just tell you, I mean, their racism, their corruption, their just that undying devotion to the brotherhood above everything else, regardless if it's right or wrong, is it's enough to turn your stomach. They only talk to a couple of the former detectives, and the smugness and the arrogance that comes through in those interviews, ugh. Now, I spent most of this documentary just terribly frustrated because for the life of me, I can't understand how Sean Ellis was actually convicted. I mean, in any normal sense, the logic that was put forth isn't logical at all. But if you look at this from a corruption angle, then the logic, it makes total sense, because when you line up everything and you manipulate things and you make it tell the story that you want it to tell versus where the facts lead you, well, then of course it's completely logical. One thing that is absolutely clear, though, is that the justice system in this time, it failed Sean Ellis. Now, something that is outside of this documentary, but it still makes me scratch my head and makes me a little annoyed or just mad sometimes, is when I think about in the United States court system, in the criminal justice system, people are innocent until proven guilty. In other words, the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a person committed the crime, that the facts and the evidence weigh in on that, and prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt that this person is guilty. But when the verdict is handed down, you're either guilty or you're not guilty. You're not guilty or innocent. And that's just wrong right there, because not guilty still has an assumption of guilt. That just means that, well, the prosecutors or whoever the investigative team was, they didn't have enough evidence or weren't able to prove their case against you. That's crap. We need to change the whole wording of that, because if you truly are innocent until proven guilty and you're not proven guilty, then the verdict that comes down should not be not guilty. It should be innocent. Okay, rant over. By the end of this documentary, I had tears in my eyes. I mean, I was questioning whether or not justice would ever be served. Now, there are 8 episodes in this, and they're each about an hour long. And so they really do take a good amount of time to build a great narrative. And it's not all just focused on Sean Ellis. I mean, they take the time to show what's going on in Boston at the time, too. So the political landscape, the justice landscape, even the socioeconomic landscape, just all of that, how that fits in. And really, it does tie into Sean Ellis's case. This documentary is so compelling, and it needs to be viewed. And the problems that Sean Ellis encountered in Boston aren't isolated to just that city. And that's why it's such an important story to tell and to be made aware of. I mean, hopefully documentaries like this are able to continue to shed light on things that are going wrong and how the system is broken in certain spots. And when you shine the light, then the darkness can't sit there. So then change can happen, and what happened to Sean doesn't happen to other people. I highly recommend checking out Trial 4. It's going to hit Netflix on November 11th, and you need to add it to your watch list right now. And when it comes on, that way it's like, boom, okay, you can start watching. The interviews are excellent. The storytelling is done really well, and it's very convincing, but it's also compelling too, and it's engaging. And I found myself sucked in to everything that was being told, and just shaking my head at somebody who's not in law enforcement, looking at just the facts that were uncovered, or then even the amount of time that it takes to uncover something. So when Sean Ellis's lawyer would request something, you would think that, okay, maybe a week, even maybe a month would go by as they collect this to deliver the information. At some points, it was like over a year. That is ridiculous and unacceptable. I mean, that should never happen. Well, there is nothing swift about that at all. So yes, this documentary is going to tick you off. It's going to make you mad. It's going to frustrate you. It'll probably bring you to tears at points, but you still need to watch. And I think it should be required reviewing for, well, basically everybody. Because once we're aware of problems and once we see them, then they become harder to ignore. And we shouldn't ignore them. We need to address them head on, deal with them, and then make the change. There's no sex or nudity. There is a lot of profanity and no violence, but graphic descriptions of violence. Make sure you check out Trial 4 when it becomes available on November 11th. Absolutely add it to your watch list. So what are you watching right now? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.